This is Perspectivas Latinas, a community service of CAN TV. I'm your host, Juan Carlos Hernandez. The organization Semillas is the only women's fund in Mexico. The nonprofit helps fund women's projects throughout the country and has a network of support here in Chicago. Today, our guests are here to talk about that work. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
So, Elena Mulcahy, let's start with you. Tell us about your work here in Chicago and how you became connected to Semillas.
Well, I'm going to answer the second part first.
Okay.
I became connected to Semillas through Maria Mangual, who was the co-founder of Mujeres Latinas en Acción, a very well-known and well-established community organization that helps women at various levels.
It began in the early 70s, right?
Yes, it's been around for a while. And Maria was a good friend and an inspirational leader. And as she moved from various positions, she became involved with the Chicago Foundation for Women. And through that organization, made contact with Semillas in Mexico and was mightily impressed. So she took off from there. She gathered a group of us in Chicago and said, we're doing this, we're giving support to Semillas. And so it became our passion in terms of the kind of work that they were doing, which is to support women, primarily indigenous women in Mexico. And she said we have to do fundraising for them. So the first event, which was a reception with food and music. And
how long ago was that?
About 7 years.
Okay.
About 7 years. So we had it at my house. And then, of course, I was personally committed, as were a number of other women. And so we continued the work. Unfortunately, Maria passed away shortly after our first event, but we continued, and so we do it for ourselves, we do it for the women in Mexico, and we do it for Maria.
Great. Laura García, thank you for coming. And
thank you, Juan Carlos.
Tell us about yourself and how you became part of this great organization.
Yes, 4 years ago I arrived to Semillas as part of the team, and then a year ago I became the executive director of Semillas. And as you mentioned, it's the only women's fund. I was involved previously with human rights work, and I immediately also became, fell in love with the work that they're doing. And it's an organization that gives me the privilege to be in close contact with groups in Mexico that are all over the country, that are doing great work, and they are always at the forefront of the women's movement in Mexico. Okay,
all over the country, that means from, I always imagine, from Tijuana to the point of Yucatan to the far end, women's groups all over the country?
That's true. We have, in fact, a group that we are currently supporting in Tijuana, and we have another one that we're currently supporting in Quintana Roo. So it's really all over the place.
And how is this? I'm curious. Tell me about the history of the organization. It's how many years? About 20.
We have been in existence for 23 years. We're the first women's fund established in the developing world. Women's funds began in the United States and in Europe, and they are basically the sort of the financial arm of the women's movement in the world. And so 23 years ago, a group of women leaders thought that they needed to create some organization that helped support women's groups in Mexico because they lacked financing.
This was in Mexico City where the group was born?
Yes, it's in Mexico City.
I'm curious as to how, it is Mexico, Mexico City is the heart of the country. How did the organization branch out and reach out and connect with such diverse groups? Because I know you work in the Sierra Tarahumara, everywhere. It's like you have connections, and I'm like, it boggled my mind. I'm like, how do they reach these folks?
I guess little by little. Probably in the first year, it was difficult to have the network that we have today, but it became a larger network with time. And one of the things that help us is obviously that the groups that we have already supported are our best promoters. So whenever we open a call for proposals, and we announce it with our own networks, and it is the previous grantees of Semillas who are usually calling other groups that they know in their communities to promote, to present a proposal.
So it's word of mouth.
Yes.
Wow. And Elena, have you had the opportunity to travel down there and see some of this work firsthand?
I've traveled to Mexico City and I visited the offices, but I'm probably this fall, I expect to get to Mexico and to visit some of the programs. Some of our core group members have been to Mexico with the express purpose of visiting some of the women that have been helped by Semillas.
From here in Chicago, the core group has gone to Mexico.
Yes, yeah.
Do you know where they've gone to? What places they visited?
I believe Rafaela went to, did you go to Chiapas?
Yes,
Yeah.
she did go
Yeah.
to Chiapas.
Yeah.
Okay. And what for what organization? With what organization did they visit?
Was it-
Rafaela went to visit an artisan cooperative called Jolón Mayetic, and they are based in San Cristobal de las Casas. And Jolón Mayetic is one of many women's cooperatives that we support, and they, through our program called Economic Autonomy, and this program has as its main objective to support women's groups that are looking for ways to reach economic autonomy through their families and through their communities.
So they're artisans. What do they create?
These ones create incredible textile work, but we have, for example, right now we're supporting a group of honey keepers, and we also have supported groups that produce organic mushrooms in their communities. So basically, it's what's great about these groups is that they gather for one purpose, but they end up organizing themselves for other purposes. So they start through their collective work. What they start seeing is that most of them suffer from violence, right? So by having women work together, they start thinking about these issues that are that affect them all. And they start then proposing to do human rights work.
So the idea might be to come together as women and join our creativity, our talent, our experience, our and a lot of cultural tradition as well. But it goes beyond that. It grows beyond that.
Definitely.
Okay.
What we see is that the way women's groups work is that they first start organizing themselves for resolving one issue, for example, their economic situation. But while organizing themselves, they start thinking about things such as, for example, the fact that they cannot participate in municipal authoritative communities. They cannot participate politically, so they start thinking about that, and then they begin creating strategies for action.
And do you go and do staff members from your group go help facilitate workshops or classes or anything like that?
Yes, we are not just a bridge of money. What we do, money is essential for them to work.
Right.
But what we do is much more. So we create models of accompaniment where we give them capacity building support, for example, to be able to administer their project well. We also give them leadership capacity building. We provide other kinds of tools, for example, security and protection for human rights defenders, which is something necessary in Mexico at the moment, etc., etc.
Right. And you mentioned a big word and a key word and something that helped motivate the organization of a group of support group here in Chicago, money. How do you go about fundraising for Semillas here?
Well, the good old ways. We receptions and dinners. We have had a successful tango party, and we're going to do one in the fall.
Tango, really?
Yeah. Well, we've also done salsa.
Oh, good. That's something I know how to dance.
Yeah, all right. Well, then you have to come to our next party and learn to tango.
Definitely. So it's through these social events.
Yes,
Mhm.
and we have had a lot of success in reaching established organizations such as the consulate to have the event there. We had an event there fairly recently, and the museum, the National Museum of Mexican Art.
Okay.
Yes.
So you have a very active network of support here.
We have a core group that's
A core group.
consistently active, but that consists of, I would say, maybe 10 women.
Mhm.
But beyond that, we certainly could use support in helping us with our events, keeping us informed about information about Chicago.
Mhm.
If I can just kind of direct the question you didn't ask.
Sure. No, go ahead. Tell me.
Well, one of the questions is, well, why do you insist on supporting women in Mexico when there is plenty of need here in Chicago?
That's a lot of international nonprofits
Yeah.
get asked that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, and it is a question, and it depends. There's certainly need is great wherever you poke. So I would say that we found that what we do helps women globally, although Mexico is right next door, but I don't think that we're looking at borders. We know that the women that we're helping in Mexico may be women that will end up here for a time, or maybe they're here and will go back, or maybe they have relatives that need to have to know about Semillas in Mexico. So it's an exchange of information, an exchange of programs and awareness that that they're not alone, that they're part of something much bigger. And so we think that our effort is important not just in fundraising, but in connecting
Right. Right.
Laura and Semillas with people like you who will help us spread the word.
Right. It certainly is a question that a lot of nonprofits get asked. Of like, well, you go anywhere here in our metro area, and there is great
plenty.
need. But I also think because of my own bond and link with Mexico, I was born there. And is that Chicago? I think Chicago and LA have such a tight bond with Mexico and such close connections that,
Right.
in many ways, it's also a natural occurrence that.
Yeah.
that
Well,
this
it is
type
a
of work-
natural occurrence, and I think that
Mhm.
borders are politically artificial. They're there for reasons other than keeping people together.
Mhm.
They're separations. So we try to provide a bridge to that.
Mhm.
Yes, there are plenty of people here that say, well, how about education? Well, Semillas does that, and we provide information about Semillas. So
Mhm.
I was born here, but of Mexican parentage,
Right.
southern Mexico.
Southern Mexico.
Southern Mexico.
Tabasco.
Yeah,
Right.
Tabasco,
Mhm.
right.
And your parents came here. They were probably some of well.
Oh,
In what years?
Well, look at these gray hair. They came here a long time ago. And but I always have fun mentioning that they came across the Gulf of Mexico to New Orleans was the point of entry.
Oh wow.
So the Mexicans here have a very varied history.
Right. Right.
And
definitely.
so I certainly can relate to the work that's being done,
Mhm.
especially in southern Mexico and of course in the north as well, even though they eat the wrong kind of tortillas.
What kind of tortillas do they eat?
Yeah, well, in the north they eat primarily flour, and in Tabasco it's all corn.
Right. Right. That's true. Some those cultural differences that we see traveling through.
We enjoy.
Yeah, definitely. She mentioned the word, and you also mentioned the word about, and I think it's very evident in your work, bridge, forming bridges with these women. Could you please tell me about a couple of women that you've worked with, and the impact that they've had prior to, well, as we were setting up the show, you did give me some information on that. Tell me about
Sure.
some of those, please.
Sure.
Mhm.
I think that one of the most inspiring things about Semillas is the capacity of Semillas to connect opportunities. It is a great connector in Mexico because we have the ability to reach the furthest to women's groups that are very that are in very remote areas that escape the radar of foundations, for example,
Right.
or of opinion leaders in Mexico that are working on the front and really looking at issues in a totally different perspective. And at the same time, Semillas mobilizes resources and has the reach to have political relations that are important in Mexico with, let's say, for example, international organizations, community leaders, the press, a network here in Chicago with a different voice, a different perspective. So one example that I could give you is last year we were invited to a great forum in Mexico City led by Yahoo. And it was a Yahoo Women's Forum. And
Yahoo, the web portal.
Yes, exactly. And so they invited us, and they first wanted Semillas to speak. But what we usually do is we bring the grantees because they're the experts in the field.
Right.
And we brought several community leaders, indigenous leaders, and the issue was women and technology. And one great result from this participation was that everyone kept talking about as if technology was already a given and was accessible to all in Mexico.
Right.
And what the leaders began saying is that they completely turned the forum around and said, okay, well, if we're going to talk about women and technology in Mexico, we cannot forget that there are millions of indigenous women who don't have access to technology. So how can we be talking about this without actually analyzing that other part? And it was a tremendous success because what we are doing and is really connecting opportunities, but it's also connecting analysis and great things to be able to improve women's quality of life in Mexico.
So they turned it around. And how did the organizers of that conference respond to this turnaround, this change, this voice of the actual women?
It was a complete success, Juan Carlos, and I think the most tweets came from what Semillas leaders said, because they were completely mind-blowing to the majority of people who have never been outside of Mexico City, or even foreigners who never dreamed to have indigenous leaders talking the way they did and so empowered. And I think that's one of the things that is probably most surprising to a lot of people that are used to charity-based work. When they reach to Semillas and when they see that Semillas supports leaders who are already empowered, who know the solutions and just need a little financial support to be able to achieve great things, you can definitely see that these women are empowered. And one of the things that they mentioned that will never escape my mind, I will always remember it, is they said, we are not vulnerable women, we just live in vulnerable contexts. And I think that's one of the most important and powerful things to say, because most people look down on them. Most people look down on people who are poor. But when you see these women talking the way they did to these rich leaders, something great happens in that forum.
Well, we'll certainly continue with talking about that. But for now, let's make a little break here and talk about some images that you brought and to see some examples of your work out in the field in Mexico.
Sure. So this is an organization called Obreras Insumisas, and it's a name I love. And they are
Insumisas, right?
Insumisas.
Not subservient.
No,
Exactly.
not sumisas.
And so this is a great organization. They work with textiles, and one of the great things about this work is that they are, unlike what's happening in maquilas in Mexico or sweatshop factories, Obreras Insumisas is an organization led by the workers themselves. and they are doing great work.
Is this part of the same?
No, this is another one. This is called a group, it's called Disnoop. It's an indigenous women's group in Yucatan Peninsula.
Okay.
And they are doing artisan work.
So they bring their cultural tradition
Exactly.
into their work.
This is another group called Holom, and they are, as you can see, they are showing their artisan work. And one of the things that we try to recuperate in Mexico through Semillas is to be able to support artisan work and be able to empower the type of indigenous textile designs that they are doing, because it's easy to have that lost.
Yes.
This is a workshop on women's rights, and they are specifically stating how women, indigenous leaders, have the right to own land property. And I don't know if you know this, but in Mexico, by usos y costumbres, which is the indigenous law,
The ejido?
yes, women are not allowed to participate in ejidos or to own land. So where they are working, for example, in really visualizing how women can understand how they can become owners of their land as well.
Okay, and this is part of the same here, or?
Yes, this is part of the same workshop.
Okay.
And this is the leader to our right is called Sebastiana Vasquez. She's a midwife. She has been working in the state of Chiapas for over 20 years.
Wow.
And Sebastiana is right now showing her work to other midwives and leaders that Semillas supports. And we convene them once a year to share their experience, and through their experience they can empower themselves.
Now this is in Mexico City.
No,
No?
that's actually in the state of Puebla,
In Puebla.
and it's a march led by women's organizations working to decriminalize abortion in Mexico. As you know, in Mexico City is the only place in Mexico where you can practice a legal abortion. The rest of the country, it is forbidden.
This, I think this is Mexico City, right?
Yes, that is Mexico
Alameda
City.
Central.
Exactly. And we're there supporting a lesbian organization. In Mexico, there's enormous amounts of violence and really high numbers of violence towards lesbians, and it's just appalling. And this is, again, Sebastiana, as you can see, and she's looking at the belly of an indigenous pregnant woman. And women in Mexico, there's one interesting fact is that the midwives are really being the leaders of the fight against maternal mortality.
Okay. And this is a clinic, or what is this?
Yes, it's a clinic, Yachilnian Ihuau, and this clinic also helps, also promotes sexual education and sexual and reproductive rights in Mexico.
I think we have one image left.
Let's see. Okay, well, she's Anita Gomez, and she has been a grantee of Semillas for several years. She's a great community leader who works with youngsters to empower young girls and prevent pregnancies, teenage pregnancies.
That is tends to be a problem in rural areas.
Yes, it's an enormous problem, and it's not uncommon to see an indigenous community in Mexico where most of the girls are married by 12. And by 22, they already have 7 children. So the main question for many leaders who are working for the improvement of living conditions in Mexico and the economy should be sexual education, because if you have 7 children by the time you're 24, there's no way that you can escape poverty. You will be stuck there. You will be having to feed your children. Women's lives and futures are completely diminished by that fact.
And for the women that are caught up, that have been caught up in that life, or how do you support them if they do have the 7 children? Make them part of a team. Have you witnessed some of that?
Yes, there's an organization in the Sierra Tarahumara in the north of Mexico that we have supported called Cari Gomari. It's a great school for women and girls. So what we do is we provide women adult education while their young children attend school. So it's a kind of an integral form of education where we know that women need to empower themselves and to be able to have some space for their own education while their children are in school.
Wow. We're running out of time here, but I'd like to hear from both of you what your vision is for Semillas Mexico and Semillas Network here in Chicago. Let's start with Chicago. What is your vision, Elena?
Well, our vision is a closer connection to Mexico by having many of our members actually see what's going on and be touched by it, so that I think that we can spread the word, get it out, and have more responsiveness on the part of the Latino community. And beyond that, there's certainly we have donations from people who are not Latino but who have feelings about Mexico and are impressed by the work that's being done.
Okay, great. Laura.
The first time that I came to Chicago, I immediately got in contact with some of the Latino supporters of Semillas, and one thing that I discovered was there's a need for Latin root communities here and population to go back or give back something to Mexico. And I think that for that, Semillas is a gold mine. We can really provide that opportunity for people who have come to the American dream, have succeeded, are here, are established, but somehow Mexico is calling them in a way, and they don't know what to do with that. So Semillas can become that bridge of opportunity here.
Bridge again.
And
Bridge again.
yeah.
Yes. I should mention that that the person that has been devoted to Semillas heart and soul here in Chicago is Gwen Stern, who is not Latina, but it's certainly an honorary one. And she's a marvel.
Close to her heart.
Yes,
She's a Latina by heart.
Yes, she is. Yes.
Well, thank you both for coming out. This has
Thank
been a great
you.
conversation,
Thank you, Juan
and
Carlos.
good luck with, and thank you for doing such great work.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here.
Perspectivas Latinas is a community service of CAN TV. If your nonprofit organization would like to work with CAN TV, call 312-738-1400 and ask for nonprofit services. Tune into Perspectivas Latinas for local issues and concerns every Thursday at 8:30 p.m. on CAN TV 21. I'm Juan Carlos Hernandez. Thank you for joining us.